Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, American families are hurting, and there's no relief in sight. We're facing skyrocketing inflation, and families are feeling it every time they go to a grocery store. We're facing a supply chain crisis that threatens to deny families the food and the goods that they need. We're facing surging energy prices that are literally burning holes in the wallets of hardworking Americans. Just this week, I drove up from Charlotte, and I was amazed at how much more it took me to refuel my truck about halfway up from Charlotte to D.C. This has gotten so bad that some families are really beginning to rethink their travel plans as we approach the holidays. We're facing a labor shortage crisis, with small businesses and farms across the country struggling to fill jobs. Even as they raise the potential salaries, the people are simply not coming. President Biden and his allies in Congress have chosen some interesting ways to respond to these crises. In some cases, they've just ignored them. They've been making excuses for others, and they've been making a case that everything will be fine if we just have more government, more spending, and more taxes. That's why for months, President Biden and congressional Democrats have put all their time and energy into crafting a completely partisan $3.5 trillion tax and spending spree. They're spending on left-wing priorities that will result in more debt, more inflation, more dependency on government, and more government intrusion into the lives of all Americans. Equally concerning is how the Democrats want to pay for some of their out-of-control spending. They plan to take $400 billion from taxpayers by monitoring and auditing their bank accounts. Democrats want to turn your bank or your credit union, that small bank around the corner in some rural community across America, into a branch of the IRS, making them monitor and report your financial activity and directly report it to the IRS. To make matters worse, the Democrats want to hire 80,000 new IRS agents so they can go through your personal financial information, what you spend your money on, what income you take in. And using that information, the IRS will then try to squeeze out any additional money that they can from you. The Democrats originally proposed making the threshold of the IRS reporting at a $600 transaction. Americans who heard about the scheme were outraged. Most Americans aren't too fond of the IRS. I dare say if you were to do a poll of the 10 most favorite government agencies, the IRS wouldn't make the list. And they certainly don't trust the IRS with having more power and more of your personal financial information. My office alone has received over 15,000 emails opposing this overreach. And I imagine many of my Democrat colleagues have heard from their constituents as well. So it's not surprising they went back to the drawing board. Since the $600 transaction wasn't selling, they came up with a new proposal. And it was a total of $10,000 in transactions that would trigger an IRS reporting requirement. But you can't be fooled by this sleight of hand. It'll subject nearly every American with a job to the same IRS scheme. Consider the average American makes a little bit more than $60,000 in annual expenditures. Yet Democrats have the audacity to claim that this plan is really just targeted to the wealthy. I don't know many hairdressers and plumbers and painters or Uber drivers who are billionaires, but I do know that they make over $10,000 a year. And they will be subject to the same scheme because of the way they make their income. Now, these hardworking Americans who've done nothing wrong could have their personal income sent directly to the IRS. And let's be clear, this additional information won't even provide the IRS with direct evidence of tax noncompliance. Instead, it would give the IRS, and keep in mind, 80,000 more IRS employees, roughly twice doubling the number of people working in the IRS, to go on a taxpayer-funded fishing investigation designed to rummage through individual Americans' finances in the hope of finding noncompliance. We don't let police enter someone's house without a warrant in the hopes they can find something illegal. And we certainly should not provide this kind of power to the IRS. And what will happen when a hardworking hairdresser or plumber or carpenter who's already struggling to make ends meet get a letter from the IRS alleging that they owe more taxes? They don't have an army of tax lawyers and accountants like billionaires do. They'll have to try and take on the IRS themselves, and that's a losing proposition. The IRS reporting plan is not about catching tax cheats and making sure billionaires are paying their taxes. It's about shaking down middle-class Americans to pay for the Democrats' tax and spending spree, plain and simple. Burning them with more bureaucracy and giving them yet another thing they have to worry about, in addition to rising inflation, energy prices, and supply chain shortages. Mr. President, I was talking with one of my staff this week about my own personal situation and what I think happens every day in this country. You have somebody that's struggling to pay their bills. I had a family member many years ago came to me and said they needed if I would give them a loan so that they could make ends meet. They worked in construction, they had a project coming due, but they had a cash flow problem. So I made them a loan, like so many people do for their friends and family members. Well, depending upon the size of that gesture, it could suddenly be a reportable transaction to the IRS. What is an IRS compliance agent going to do? They're going to call you up and say, well, you didn't report that as income. And then the person's going to say, well, it was a loan. And then the IRS agent's going to say, well, where was the document? It was with a brother or an uncle or a cousin. We shook hands and I promised to pay them back. Those are the kinds of things that are going to happen if this IRS task transaction reporting goes into place. That's why I recently joined with Senator Tim Scott and dozens of my Republican colleagues to introduce legislation that will prevent the Biden administration and the IRS from implementing their surveillance plan. It's wrong, it's an overreach, and it's not going to work. But the easiest solution is for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to simply drop this misguided IRS reporting scheme. Tax and spend policies have already made life harder for middle-class Americans. Americans are struggling from the impact of COVID, from the impact of inflation, from energy shortages, and so many uncertainties that we've experienced over the past couple of years. The last thing they need is to have the IRS, with an army of tens of thousands of IRS agents, prying into their bank accounts and causing more confusion, more frustration, and more heartache at the worst possible time. Thank you, Mr. President.
I call this hearing to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. I'd like to begin by noting some important requirements. Let me begin by saying that the standing House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they're expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceedings, so please keep your cameras on. Also, please remember to remain muted until you're recognized to minimize background noise. If you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I'll move to the next available member of the same party, and I will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided that they have returned to the proceeding. For those members and staff physically present in the committee room today, in accordance with the attending physician's most recent guidance, all members and staff who attend this hybrid hearing in person will be required to wear masks in the hearing room. With that said, members will be allowed to briefly remove their masks if they've been recognized to speak. I'll now begin with my opening statement. Small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. They employ nearly half the private workforce and drive development through groundbreaking innovations. However, to be successful, they need capital. Congress has long realized that funding on reasonable terms can be hard to come by for small firms. So in 1958, Congress created the Small Business Investment Company Program at SBA, or the SBIC program. The goal was to bridge the gap between availability of venture capital and the needs of high-growth small businesses. Under the SBIC program, SBA partners with private institutions to provide financing to small, early-stage companies. Since its inception, the SBIC program has provided over $100 billion in capital to entrepreneurs across the country. These funds have helped transform small firms into powerhouse job creators. Early-stage small businesses that received SBIC investments include Apple, Costco, FedEx, and Intel. In fiscal year 2020, SBICs financed 1,063 small businesses with an average amount of just under $2 million. These funds helped entrepreneurs acquire new companies, refinance debt, conduct R&D, purchase equipment, and generally operate their enterprise. This is progress from the delays and mismanagement that has plagued the program in years past, and our committee has worked to correct. In fact, last year, the SBA licensed 26 new SBICs, which is up from 18, and in 2021, they broke the record again, licensing 32 new SBICs. Despite these successes, there are still issues with the program that the committee must continue to address. One such problem is the lack of diversity, both among investors and portfolio companies. In 2007, the SBA acknowledged that women and minorities participated in the program at low rates. Today, the diversity numbers haven't budged. For example, in 2020, SBICs only made up around 5% of their total financing to minority-owned small businesses. The numbers were even worse for businesses owned by women and veterans. After nearly 15 years of poor diversity metrics, we must get serious about increasing participation for women and minorities in the program. So today, I'm looking forward to discussing ways that this committee can further improve the SBIC program. I also look forward to learning from our witnesses who have extensive experience within this sector. I'd now like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Muser, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Davids, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. Mr. Michelson, we appreciate you making the trip in from Iowa. Thank you very much. So, Chairwoman Davids, thank you for calling this hearing to examine this important issue, the SBA Small Business Investment Company Program. Before we delve too deeply into federal government investing programs, I want to touch on some of the realities on the ground that are facing small businesses nationwide, certainly in my district and throughout Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, even with a high level of demand, it is a tough time for small business. After the devastating blows of COVID-19, particularly in certain states where arbitrary shutdowns were forced of various small businesses on a relatively random basis, the nation's job creators are facing rising costs, whatever spiking inflation, trouble with finding workers, difficulty with keeping their shelves filled, for that matter. With holidays approaching, these supply chain issues are bottlenecking and potentially jeopardizing what could be a light at the end of the tunnel for many of these small businesses, which is certainly their hope. Through all of this, the Biden administration and much of the Democrat leadership in the House do continue to threaten more government spending on the demand side of the equation, and paid for by raising taxes on small businesses. This is a very, very self-defeating initiative. In one of the latest regulations for small businesses, on September 9th of this year, the Biden administration announced a vaccine mandate for small businesses with 100 employees or more. There are many businesses with less employees than that think, because the guidelines haven't been issued, that they will be affected as well. So it creates levels of uncertainty, which is the last thing a business wants. To say the least, this announcement has left small business with numerous outstanding questions and concerns about retaining their employees, especially during such a severe labor crisis. There is no doubt these are difficult times for small businesses. However, the nation's smallest firms are some of the most resilient. We don't have to look very far to find a small business that received a direct hit from COVID-19 but got back on their feet because of their perseverance and yes, some government programs such as the PPP. Many of these businesses did, in fact, reinvent themselves, while others simply were able to meet the demand where it was to be found. We all on this committee salute these businesses as they continue to work through the recovery, and they are what the recovery is all about. In addition to the economic firestorms that small businesses are facing, they also struggle continuously with access to capital and financing opportunities to grow and expand their businesses. That is why the SBIC program has been an important resource in the Small Business Administration toolbox. With the goal of injecting private equity into the small business ecosystem, the SBIC program and other federal programs have the ability to reach down to businesses that might be geographically overlooked, including in my district in Pennsylvania. Ensuring small businesses across our nation have access to these tools is important. Unfortunately, much of the investing is currently dedicated or siloed in certain areas of the country. Small businesses in rural areas often struggle with gaining access to capital. I'm hoping that through this hearing we can develop pragmatic solutions to encourage more investment opportunities in worthy companies located particularly in rural America. This committee should work together through regular order, meaning examining an issue at a committee hearing level, crafting legislation together and voting on it at the committee level, and if successful, moving it to the full House of Representatives. Unfortunately, that process was bypassed by my Democrat colleagues when they drafted and took up the most recent budget reconciliation bill without Republican input. I do look forward to discussing all of these issues this morning with our witnesses, as well as ensuring this program does reach its full potential. This program really should be studied and examined comprehensively. As members of Congress and as members of this committee, it's important for us to exercise our oversight duty to explore how these programs are operating year in and year out. The SBIC program has many layers, and it is worth examining thoroughly. I look forward to this conversation beyond this hearing. Again, I want to thank our witnesses for joining, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Muser. The gentleman yields back. I'd like to take a moment to explain how the hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your microphone is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when you're finished. With that, I'd like to introduce, I'll go through and introduce each of our witnesses, and then we'll get started. Our first witness is Ms. Holly Hewells. Ms. Hewells is the founder and managing partner of Holloway Capital Partners, which is an SBIC licensed small business investment company with offices in the district I represent, targeting small manufacturers in the greater Midwest and southern U.S. Her insights will be critical for us to learn how SBA's SBIC program can play a role in helping finance the future of our domestic manufacturing base. She previously testified before the committee in October of 2009, so we're pleased to be able to hear from you again regarding the SBIC program. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Hewells. Our second witness is Ms. Carmen Palafox, a partner with Mila Capital, a pre-seed and seed stage investment fund based in Los Angeles. 32% of Mila Capital's portfolio companies are led by women CEOs, 58% are led by immigrants, and 42% address United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As a non-SBIC investment fund, she represents the type of investor who would be well served by the committee's recent efforts to expand licensing options within the SBIC program. Ms. Palafox is also a founding board member of Latinx VC, a group of experienced investors working to engage and foster the Latinx venture capital ecosystem. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Palafox. The ranking member, Mr. Muser, is now going to introduce our third and final witness.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Our next witness is John Michelson. Mr. Michelson is the co-founder and managing partner of Midwest Growth Partners in West Des Moines, Iowa. That's Des Moines. Midwest Growth Partners is a private equity fund management firm that specializes in assisting and investing in underserved rural markets, including businesses in the food and agricultural, manufacturing, and distribution and logistic industries. Mr. Michelson has an extensive background in investing and finance and has an undergraduate degree, law degree, and MBA from the University of Iowa, and was also a member of the school's Division I football team. I don't know how they did that week, but maybe or that year, maybe we'll get into it while you're there. Additionally, Mr. Michelson is a former city councilman in West Des Moines, Iowa. I am looking forward to learning more about the strategic rural investing that Mr. Michelson brings to his rural community. I want to thank again all witnesses for joining us today, for taking the time away from your busy schedules, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Muser. And I appreciate all of you being here today. And with that, I will turn it over. Ms. Hewells, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.